Good evening and welcome everyone to this evening's town hall, where we're here to discuss the fiscal year 2015 defense budget. I'm Mike Hayden, Director of Government Relations with the Military Officers Association of America. The purpose of the evening's events is to educate you on the various people-related changes that are being proposed in this year's defense budget. And we have a panel of experts here to do just that. We understand the dilemma the Pentagon is facing with sequestration. Sequestration is why the budget planners are actually looking at all accounts to curb costs. And it also includes personnel accounts. And with that, we're looking at end strength, cuts to pay, cuts to the housing allowance, as well as health care and commissary changes. Why, you ask? Well, the Pentagon leadership has adopted a catchphrase, if you would, to slow the growth. And that is they're focusing on the past decade's personnel cost growth trajectory as a reason to adopt changes to people programs. Have cost growth gone up since then? Since 2000? Yes, they have. But using 2000 as a baseline without appropriate context can be very misleading. First, it implies that at the turn of the century, personnel costs was the appropriate way of measuring what the cost should be it health care or even personnel-related programs. And nothing could be further than the truth. At the time, years of cutbacks had depressed military pay, had changed the retirement value by approximately 25% for those who were post-1986 entrants, and booted beneficiaries over the age of 65 out of the military treatment facilities. As a result, retention was on the ropes, and the Joint Chiefs asked Congress for a fix. Congress has worked diligently over the past decade to restore military pay comparability, repeal those retirement cuts, zero out the housing cost, and also restore that promised health care for the older retirees. In other words, the cost growth over the past decade has been essential to keep the previous cutbacks from breaking the career force. But with sequestration still pending, the Pentagon is repeating some of those very same bad habits of the 80s and 90s. They're cutting pay, they're cutting benefits, and they're cutting end strength to curb costs. But enough on the history. It's my pleasure to turn it over to our moderator this evening, Ward Carroll with military.com. Thank you, Ward.
Thank you, Mike. As Mike said, we've assembled a great set of guest speakers tonight that'll be able to give you sort of the brass tacks about how this budget has played out, the 2015 budget submission. So let me go ahead and introduce each person, starting with Mike. Colonel Mike Hayden, Air Force retired, is the director of MOAA's Government Relations. Mike joined the MOAA legislative team in July of 2005 upon completion of a 25-year military career in air and space operations, personnel, recruiting, training, and education. Focusing on active duty and retiree compensation issues, he worked with MOAA to accomplish key legislative efforts, including a win for survivor benefit plan coverage for survivors of service members killed on active duty. Next, we have Colonel Mike Barron, Army retired, Deputy Director of MOAA's Government Relations. Colonel Barron is a decorated combat veteran and joined MOAA's Government Relations Department in 2013 after a 30-year career as an infantry officer and a national security strategist. Since retiring from active duty, Colonel Barron has been an executive with the Boeing Company working in its Washington, D.C. Government Operations Office, first as Director of Government Affairs and then as Director of International Operations and Policy. He came to MOAA following his passion of serving the military and veterans community and specializes in defense policy, active duty compensation, and retirement issues. Next, we have my good friend Tom Tarantino, who's the Policy Associate at IAVA. As Chief Policy Officer, Tom provides strategic guidance for and leadership of IAVA's legislative, research, and political departments. He's responsible for ensuring that veterans issues remain a priority in the political landscape, and that IAVA's members have a strong voice in D.C. Tom is a former Army captain who left the service in 2007 after 10 years. He returned from Iraq in 2006 after 1 year of deployment with the 11th Armored Cavalry Regiment. Tom served in combat as both a cavalry and mortar platoon leader and was awarded the Combat Action Badge and Bronze Star. Next is Candace Wheeler, who's a spokesperson for the Coalition to Save Our Military Shopping Benefits. Candace is a proud military spouse and serves as spokesperson for the Coalition to Save Our Military Shopping Benefits as it works to ensure service members, veterans, and their families have a voice in shaping policies that impact our nation's ability to sustain a healthy and vibrant military resale system and protect their earned commissary and exchange benefits. Previously, Candace served as chairman of the Board of Governors and Government Relations Deputy Director for the National Military Family Association. There, she earned the reputation as a staunch advocate for the military community and was widely recognized as a spokesperson for military families in the halls of the Capitol and the Department of Defense. Next, we have Captain Kathy Beasley, Navy retired, Deputy Director of MOAA's Government Relations. Kathy is a Navy nurse who retired from active duty in 2009. Her 30-year active duty career included tours of duty as officer in charge of the Naval Facility Clinic at Andrews Air Force Base, Director of Healthcare Planning and Support at the Bureau of Medicine and Surgery at the headquarters of the U.S. Navy, Chief of Staff at the National Capital Area Multi-Service Market Office at Walter Reed Medical Center, and Director of Health Care Plans and Operations at National Naval Medical Center at Bethesda. As MOAA's lead military healthcare lobbyist, Captain Beasley specializes in the managed care arena, TRICARE operations, and healthcare operational planning. Lastly is my good friend Jeremy Hilton. He's a veteran and a military family advocate. Jeremy Hilton, both as a veteran and an Air Force spouse, is one of the co-founders of the #KeepYourPromise Alliance. As an advocate for military families and military dependents impacted by disabilities, he was named Military Spouse Magazine's 2012 Military Spouse of the Year and has previously served on MOAA's Spouse Council. Jeremy's expertise has been sought by the Government Accountability Office, the National Council on Disability, and the Department of Defense. So let's get right to it. Topic number one that we'd like to deal with tonight is dealing with pay caps. And the Pentagon's budget proposal caps pay below the employment cost index for the second straight year at 1%. This is 0.8% below private sector wage growth. So these cuts may seem minor on an annual level, but Tom, how much will they end up costing the typical officer or enlisted service member over a number of years?
Right. Well, if you look at Chart 5, this gives you an estimate aggregate for an E5 and an O3. For a young sergeant, that's almost $600. For a young captain, that's about $1,100 total. But even if you're looking at that young sergeant at 3 years, you're still looking at almost $500. And so, when you talk about how much this is going to cost the force, you can look at it in terms of dollar amounts. And it is significant because the base pay, especially for that young E5, is not very much. And that $500 actually means a lot more to that family. But you have to look at it in terms of total cost. One of the things that we have seen through the DoD and through their presentation of this budget is that they're looking at things in silos. And they're looking at, well, we're only cutting the pay this much, so it's not that bad. We're only reducing, BAH by this much, it's not that bad. We're only reducing the commissaries by this much, so it's not that bad. You have to stop thinking in terms of what service members get in a line item basis and think about how it affects the total package of their life. And think about how this affects their cost of life. And when you look at that picture, it's much more dire. What we are doing is we are making a false choice between what the DoD says it needs to fight, which we'll talk about in a little bit, and what the troops who actually fight need to live. And that's not a choice that we need to make, because in order to have a strong all-volunteer force, you have to make the military a viable middle-class career. And that includes not just pay, but it includes housing, it includes commissaries, it includes your benefits. That makes the package and makes a military lifestyle viable, sustainable, and a decent launching pad to a civilian career, whether you serve 2 years, 10 years, or 20 years. And so when you look at the military saying, well, we're just going to cut pay, but at the same time, they're also increasing the cost of food on military bases, and then at the same time, they're increasing the cost of housing. And so it's almost a triple hit. You're reducing the amount of money they're getting paid while increasing the cost of living 25 to 30%. And that's the real net effect. And what that means is that the military might not be a viable middle-class career. And for myself, the second half of my career, I was an officer. As a young single captain with 10 years of service, I was making a good amount of money. When I was a junior enlisted guy and all of my soldiers, These were men and women who were 22, 23 years old. They had a family. That pay scale is not enough to absorb the increase in cost of living. And what happens is you're going to have people deciding that, you know what, maybe as much as I love the military, as much as I love my country, I can't afford this career. And what you end up happening 5, 6, 7, 8, 10 years down the line is that whole class of young men and women who realized they could not make a living in the military as a junior enlisted person do not fill the senior enlisted or later on the officer ranks that are required for leadership. We saw this happen in the 80s and the 90s when we were facing almost the exact same problems. And this is what they talk about, gutting the force. You get people to enlist, but if they don't want to stay, you don't create the structure you need to have effective leadership and to be effective on the battlefield. And so when you look at it in a siloed way of individual pay and individual benefits, you're not looking at the total picture, and you're not understanding how all of this affects not just the life and the livelihood of the military, but also its ability to be an effective combat force.
So, Mike Barron, to expound on what Tom was just talking about with respect to the net effect, if these pay caps stay in place, because we're hearing bad things about the 2016 budget as well, never mind the 2015 budget. So what does this do to the all-volunteer force? Again, you talk about gutting mid-grade officers, and they're not there for leadership positions. I mean, what's the net effect that maybe the budgeteers aren't considering?
Well, I think the net effect here, and bottom line up front here, is that this is going to mean reduced purchasing power for military service members and their families right off the bat. If you look at the chart that we put up here, number 4, it basically shows the pay gaps were throughout the 1990s led to a 13.5% pay gap between military pay and comparable civilian sector pay, hurting retention, recruiting, and career force issues there. Congress made great strides over the past decade to fix that. And you can see on the chart there where they've raised those at ECI. They indexed all future pay raises based on what the problems they'd had in the 90s on ECI, Economic Cost Index, so it would be comparable. Those pay raises would be comparable to the civilian sector, and they kept on matching those through the 2000s, so that we would match up from that 13.5% pay gap that was in the 90s. This last budget proposal in 2014, the NDA pushed through. The NDA was pushed through by DoD against the efforts of MOAA and our coalition partners. A 1% pay raise against what it was called for under ECI, which should have been a 1.8% pay raise. And again, they're doing that going on this next year here. So over time, what this is really going to mean is a lost purchasing power for our military families and their and service members. And as Tom eloquently pointed out here, you've seen the numbers, roughly around almost $600 per year, starting out for an E5 with a 10 years of service and a family of 4, and an 03 about $1,100 with a family of 4 with 10 years of service as well. So overall, we don't know how it's going to be. We do have a history lesson here that really shows what went on in the 90s when we had those pay caps there, and we reduced that purchasing power, that gap. But we'll see over time what it really does, what it means to recruiting, readiness, and overall retention of the force. The story waits to be told.
So let's focus on the commissary and housing picture here real quick. I'm pleased to say that one of my writers, Amy Bouchatz, broke the story about the $1.2 billion cut a few weeks back, and unfortunately that has proved to be true. So Candace, what does a $1 billion plus cut do to commissaries, and how does that play out?
Well, the president's budget does represent a $1 billion cut to the commissary funding over the next 3 years. And this would drastically reduce the current funding level of $1.4 billion, which annually, and when you look at that, it would be a 70% decrease in funding. Our overseas commissaries would continue to be funded, but all stateside support would be eliminated. And although a lot of discussion was about perhaps commissaries closing, but although the Secretary of Defense has said no commissary will close, There is a difference, and I want you all to understand that there is a difference between keeping a commissary open and protecting your commissary benefit. And let me explain how that is different. Your 30% savings would disappear. In some locations like Hawaii and Alaska, the commissary actually saves you nearly 50% over local grocery stores. Without the savings, this will cost you and your family thousands of dollars. And let me point to chart 5. We talk about the annual loss of purchasing power from FY 2015, the proposal for the active duty family of 4 with 10 years of service would be nearly $3,000. So that is a lot of purchasing power that families will be losing. And this is happening at a time when the Department of Agriculture has pointed to the fact that we actually have a food inflation of basic groceries. And we're talking staples when we're looking at bread and milk and normal products that families need will be on the rise. And we're asking our families to take less money during that period of time. Also, it's important for you to understand, without the savings, you lose your earned benefit. Your benefit goes away. And let me explain. Keep in mind that your commissary benefit is much more than just a shopping opportunity. A lot of people have talked about it being a discount shopping opportunity off the installation. It is much more than that. It is part of your pay and benefits compensation package. And so if we are reducing that amount of money, we are actually asking families to have a cut in their pay on top of the pay raises that will be cut as well. I think it's also important for you to realize that with less money each month, you and your family are going to have to make some tough choices. So what would those be? I mean, your car needs to be repaired, and so you may have to put that off. You may not be able to save the amount of money you want for college for your children, or maybe for your retirement savings. You may have to postpone that family vacation you had planned to take. Our families are going to see a difference in the bottom line of their budget. Now, without these savings, I think it's important for you to realize that eventually you will think twice about going to your commissary, because it will no longer be worth the trip. And as commissaries do not provide you the savings that they used to, you will begin not to go, patronage will drop, and eventually commissaries will close. That is what our concern is. And if that happens, commissary employees will be out of a job. And I think it's important, I think many of our listeners tonight know that the commissary employs a great deal of military family members. Nearly 64% of our family members have a military connection. Over 30% are military spouses. So this would also be the loss of income for these families, which would be a double hit to them financially. So that's a very critical thing for you to realize. One of the things, though, that we keep talking about is we do understand that this is a difficult time for the Department of Defense, that with sequestration and shrinking budgets, it has put a great deal of strain on the Department of Defense. And we get that, and you do as well. And as a commissary shopper, you understand, and as a military family member, you understand that choices have to be made. But I do want to point out that the commissary program itself is part of the solution to our budget problems, not part of the problem. It actually is one of the most efficient programs within the Department of Defense. It has actually saved nearly $700 million out of the system over the past years, and it is also a program that should be emulated, not decimated. And so we still do not understand why this program has been targeted. The Military Times did a survey back in December of their readers and asked readers whether they felt the commissary was a highly prized benefit for them. And our enlisted service members said that they highly use the commissary. And many of you know that you do use the commissary, and it helps you to make ends meet. And our active duty families said that it was highly valued by them. And for those of you that are in the retired community, especially those of you on fixed income, you realize that this is a critical benefit to you, that you've actually decided where you would retire based on the fact that you would have a commissary benefit as well as your health care and all the other important military programs that are provided on your installation. A couple other points that we think is important for you to know is that I think it's important for families to realize that this is an earned benefit. It is an earned benefit by your service. For those of you that are currently serving, you are earning that benefit. For those of you that served over 20 years, you bought down that benefit with your service. For those of you that are 100% disabled, you did that for your service as well, and for this benefit. And for our families that lost a loved one, you earn that benefit through their loss. So this is not a program that you should give up. We understand that families are used to sacrificing for their nation, but you should not have to give up your earned benefits in order to help protect the country.
Candace, you make a good point, and probably this is the right time to sort of say that, you know, this panel, people involved in the veteran service organizations understand that hard choices have to be made. I think what we're talking about here is flagging and socializing the unintended consequences of bad choices. That's what we're talking about here. Mike Barron, so talking about the housing situation in the 2015 budget submission, it is apparent that the administration wants the military families to pay more for housing. So how's this going to play out in terms of out-of-pocket costs, and what's that going to do to the pocketbooks of service members?
Thanks for the question, Ward. Yeah. Again, over the last 10 years or so, Congress has worked extremely hard to eliminate the out-of-pocket expenses for basic allowance for housing. Prior to 2000, most military families had to pay about 20% out-of-pocket. They closed that gap very successfully over the last decade. The DoD 2015 budget proposal, again using the DoD term, attempts to slow the growth, if you will, of that amount coming out of pocket, and so that they would have available for housing, and gradually slow the annual basic allowance of housing increases over time, so that it would only cover, instead of 100% out of pocket, which it currently does, it would go down to about 95%. So it ends up being about a 6% reduction when you also include in there the renter's insurance piece that's a part of that. The Secretary of Defense has stated that he thinks that this proposal is fair, and that no one will see an immediate drop in basic allowance for housing payments until they actually PCS. Because there's the policy in effect with DoD. So what does this mean in terms of real money? Again, it comes down to a lost purchasing power for those service member and their families. For example, what it means directly in terms of actual dollar amounts is that for an E5, again with a family of 4, 10 years of service, it's a loss of about a little over $1,200 per year. And for an 03 with a family of 4, 10 years of service, again, would mean a loss of almost $1,600 per year. So it is a significant impact out there, and again, it will be a reduction overall in purchasing power of that service member and their families.
Let's talk about end strength. I know this is a very high-vis part of the budget, and military.com is right there talking about things. For instance, the numbers that I understand about the Army, currently somewhere at the 550 to 570 range, getting down as low as 440. Drastic cuts. We ran a story today about the Air Force, drastic cuts, Marine Corps taking a hit. So again, Mike Barron, a lot of service members are asking if this means could you be separated, against your will before you intended, before your career projection. Could that happen?
Yes, if you look at a chart number 3 on here, it shows that basically this is the second major reduction that we've had in force reduction since levels since 1980. The previous force reduction drawdown occurring in the early to mid 1990s post Desert Storm. The bulk of the force reductions are going to come from the ground forces, so mostly are going to come from the Army and the Marine Corps, though there will be reductions in force both for the Navy and the Air Force, and there will also be reductions in the reserve components. The Army was originally planned to draw down their forces to pre-9/11 levels, which was around 490K. By 2017, that ramp has now been steepened due to sequestration and some other issues there. They're going to ramp that down, and we're actually going to hit that number by 2015, so much steeper ramp. And the Army now is projected, and pretty well talked about, is going down to levels of about 440 to 450 over time. Marines are going to go down to 182K, and then they'll also drop another down to ultimately 175K is what's projected here. So what the services are going to do and how this is going to affect families out there is that first the services are going to control accessions, are going to control retention, and they're also going to control strongly promotions going forward on this. And they have some tools they're going to use, both voluntary tools and involuntary tools. On the involuntary tools, they have what are called selective early retirement boards, SERB boards, and they also have reduction in force boards that they can utilize. The Army and the Marine Corps have already utilized the SERB boards in this fiscal year, and in the Army this month in March we'll implement the very first RIF board that they've had. And on those, based on those numbers that are out there, there's going to be a number of folks that are going to be forced to leave the service. If separated, basically they're going to be looking heavily at manner of performance on that, what that's going to mean to overall their career. And really families need to kind of look hard at preparing for the plan B, if you will, and what does that mean. And I would highly encourage folks to talk to their career force managers and look at what their current situation is, because there is a number of folks that will definitely be affected as we draw down. It's a very steep ramp that's going to, for the forces going forward, particularly in the Army and the Marine Corps.
So, Mike, you mentioned performance. Are there any other variables that play into those boards? Do warfare especially play in? Are some communities going to get hit harder than others?
Great question, Ward. Yeah, I think specialties will be called into play here, particularly in certain services. They'll be looking at different career specialties. Again, man of performance. They'll look at a number of things too across the board, but a good look across on who will be staying and who will be going. But again, these are the involuntary tools, and MOAA's position on this is that given the fact that we've been in 2 wars over the last dozen years, and the supreme sacrifices have been made by many men and women in uniform and their families over time, we really strongly encourage the services who have the authority to choose whether to use the voluntary or the involuntary tools to go with the voluntary tools. Voluntary separation authority, temporary early retirement authority, and use of the voluntary early release program, which would allow a more easier transition for service members after their honorable service to move on. And that's pretty much MOAA's position on this.
So, as the budgeteers do their thing in the Hill, we get involved in these food fights. Meanwhile, the world goes on, right? So, we think of the flashpoints we've had in the last 24 months: Libya, Syria. What's happening now in the Ukraine. I'm not aware of any theater commander or service chief balking on a commitment or a requirement. So, Tom, what happens to the guys that stay in, right? We have 10-month cruises is the standard now in the Navy. They're trying to go down to 8. You served in a time when 15-month deployments were the norm. We talk about when you have fewer people, those left behind wind up doing more, right? So what do you think? How does that play out?
Right. Well, this is a symptom of the larger problem that we have. And before I start, I just wanted to thank Mike and MOAA for having me here. I really appreciate the opportunity to come and talk about this. And thank you all very much. This decision with reducing end strength isn't a decision of strategy. This isn't about we have lower military obligations and therefore we need a smaller military. If that were the case, then that would be a whole different conversation. This is a budgetary decision. And we are reducing the size of our military because of this fiscal gun that's being held to the military's head by a Congress that was more than willing to send people to war for 12 years, but now is too cheap to pay the bill. And so when we talk about we have to make hard choices, I would argue that a lot of these choices were made almost a decade ago. And now we're trying to go back and reevaluate those. Now, I'm no, peacenik hippie or anything. I'm not giving you an anti-war message. What I'm saying is that, as a leader and as a former military officer, I was taught to evaluate my decisions and then understand the second and third order effects. And what we have right now is a national leadership that does not understand the second and third order effects of their decisions. And so what you have is a budget-driven decision to reduce end strength. And what that is going to do is that's going to put an incredible strain on the military. It's not just that we're going to reduce 50, 60,000 over the period of the next 10 years. They're wanting to do it in the next few. So the simple answer is that you are going to have fewer people with more obligations. And what this is sort of playing into this lie, for lack of a better term, that we're going back to a peacetime military. And this is not happening. We have been at war for 12 years, and the conventional thinking is that we go back to peacetime and garrison duty, and everyone goes on police call and doesn't walk on the lawn, and we go back to all that nonsense. That's not going to happen. We are entering into a period of 2 or 3 decades of sustained small intensity conflict. So the op tempo is not going to go back to pre-2001 levels. That is just not going to happen. There's no military strategist alive on this planet who thinks that's the truth. So what you're going to have are fewer people doing much more, whether it's small 9-month deployments to hotspots, whether it's humanitarian missions. We started to see this in the late 90s with Bosnia, with Haiti, with even Malaysia for a time. That type of thing is going to happen, and it's going to happen a lot more. And when you have it with a smaller force, that stress that was put on the wartime military is going to maintain. And we have been in this mindset, so we'll just suck this up for a little while because eventually the war is going to end and life is going to get back to normal. But we have to accept a new normal, and the new normal is a high op tempo. And it's not just about the op tempo in the field too. This is also going to have ripple effects at home. It's going to have ripple effects for the family, not just the stress of continued routine deployments, but when you are reducing the force in such a quick manner, you also have to look at the second and third order effects of what it does to on-base services. Suddenly you're going to have a much smaller population dramatically on a major military installation. And when you're in a fiscal environment that is looking at cutting things that should be sacrosanct, like your shopping benefits, like your pay, like your housing, like your health care, what's going to happen when there's such a dramatic rise in or drop in total population of the base, and maybe the need for childcare isn't that much, so we can cut the childcare. Maybe we can cut some of the MWR facilities that families need. So there are ripple effects that go throughout this, and then if we're not thinking about it, what we're going to find is in 2 or 3 years, we're going to lose a lot more than we think we're losing now. And again, the military is no longer going to be a viable middle-class lifestyle.
Well, the thing about that is this isn't a theoretical, right? We've learned this lesson. We've gone through this before. So in the late 70s into the 80s, we were sending carriers. I'm a Navy guy, so I look at carriers. But we were sending carriers on cruise for 11 months, bringing home for 4 months and sending them right on cruise. Retention was terrible during those times. So when Secretary Lehman was Secretary of the Navy, he created in law 6-month cruises and then 12-month turnarounds at least. And that did sort of steady the waters, right? So the other thing that happens, to your point about on base, is if you look at your career progression, part of the promise when you walk in the accession source is things like advanced education and other, not to mention a quality home life. Those are the first things to go, right? If you're operating, if you're the guy who's doing more with less, then your shore duty goes down. So you don't have time to get your master's degree, or a sailor who gets his bachelor's or whatever. And again, that is a retention issue that's not theoretical. We've seen it. We did gut the force. And so if America doesn't care, right, you've created this cadre of warfighters since 9/11 that you're at risk of wasting because you're going to treat them poorly. So
I quote my friend Bob Norton from MOAA. He says, "I've seen this bad movie before, and we're watching it all again." And it's not, we in the military, if you want to get above an E7, you have to have a bachelor's degree. If you want to get above 03, or if you want to go above 04, you pretty much have to have a master's degree. And so what we're actually doing is we're going to create a less trained, less educated force if this keeps going in the long run. And we're ultimately damaging the effectiveness and the professionalism of the military and the ability of those people to transition back into the civilian career, whether they stay in for 10 years or 20 years.
Yeah. And we're already doing this to our people, right? I mean, I was out at the FCA conference in San Diego a couple of weeks ago and moderated a JSF panel, and had a chance to talk to a guy who's CAG 11 operations and other guys. They're just operating all the time. Again, when they said that 10-month cruises was the standard, it freaked me out. I mean, I couldn't believe that that was the standard. So we're burning people out already, and it's going to get worse if these budgets come through. Let's talk health care. You know, Kathy, we've heard a lot about the TRICARE going from 3 options to 1 option. Tell us a little bit about that, and how does that net out? What's going to happen there?
Sure, Chris. Thanks for being here, and I'm privileged to join into this excellent discussion here tonight. The healthcare proposals that are being submitted are a symptom of this disease of sequestration. In the budget recently submitted, the department seems to be taking the stance of throwing almost anything against the wall to include your healthcare in an effort to see what will stick. After all this is over, you know, the question has to be asked, what's going to be left? I'd like to just briefly review a little bit of history here. By way of background, since 2006, the department has repeatedly sought TRICARE fee increases to shift the cost burden to those who have already sacrificed for the defense of our country. This budget is another example of attempting to compare your health care benefit, which by the way is an earned benefit, to a civilian-like plan. Remember that during the past 2 years, Congress has already taken measures to address cost control, including increasing fees, linking fee increases for retirees to COLA, and mandating mail-order pharmacy for our TRICARE for Life participants. The current proposal consolidates the TRICARE insurance benefit from 3 programs into 1. Everyone now, except the active duty, will pay and the active duty family members will pay a participation fee. That's not an enrollment fee, it's called a participation fee. Also, they will raise most all co-payments for visits, including visits to the MTF, a military treatment facility. They'll increase pharmacy co-payments, and they will establish a means-tested enrollment fee for TRICARE for Life, and forces everyone, by the way, to use the home delivery pharmacy maintenance delivery option, which is now just strictly for TRICARE for Life. There are several issues with doing this, and this affects all 3 of our beneficiary groups: the active duty family member, the retirees under age 65 and their families, and our retirees over age 65 who are on TRICARE for Life. If we could see chart 6, please. We've taken the liberty here at MOAA to describe 2 scenarios on the impact of DoD proposed fees starting in 2015 for military families and retirees under age 65. I'd like to bring your attention first to the currently serving family of 4 example that we have on here. You can see the current column. This is based on a scenario assuming a family of 4 who gets 1 brand name prescription per month at a retail pharmacy and perhaps 1 generic mail-order medication in prescription per month. Currently, you can see $504 is roughly what they pay. That's a very conservative amount, I know. In the new proposal, starting in 2015, that jumps a bit to, mainly due to pharmacy copay shares, to $612, and out to FY 2019, roughly up to a little over $800. This is fairly significant, and again, a very conservative amount considering most currently serving families, 70% of them live off base, so they might be more inclined to use the market or economy-based pharmacies and providers. So again, it could be very conservative estimation. Looking at the above chart here for a retiree under age 65, family of 3, again another conservative assumption, using 5 doctor visits in the network per year, assuming a brand name prescription at a retail pharmacy and 3 generic mail order meds per month. Currently, right now, we have the 2 prime and standard options. So prime, currently people are paying families paying an enrollment fee. They've got their visit copays, and they're roughly paying about $800 a year. Under the standard, there is currently no enrollment fee and no visit copays there. And cost shares, about roughly, again, $500 a year. Jumping to 2015, everyone will be paying that participation fee. It's no longer, again, an enrollment fee. It's a participation fee, 1 flat program for everyone. So basically, individuals would be paying for a prime enrollment fee using the standard insurance option. And you can see that the fees roughly $1,500 in the first year, and marching it out to fiscal year 19 is going to be well over $2,400. That's by our estimation there. So we could take the slide off now. You can see that what this consolidation, or what the department calls modernization of your health plan, really does in dollars and cents. A couple other things we're concerned about regarding the changes in the healthcare plan here, the consolidation of into one. First off, there will be no longer a guaranteed access to care, which is what one in the prime option enjoys. Guaranteed access to care is within certain time parameters that are published. You can see your physician or get a specialty appointment. There will be no standards after this. So do you think there will be increased access to the military treatment facilities when, as the department is predicting and saying, more people will be seeking their care there? That's a question we would like to see answered. In addition, these new costs are required from both the retirees and the family members of active duty personnel, is greatly reducing a fundamental benefit, we think, while raising the cost to the beneficiary. So essentially, they are asking you to pay more to get less. These fee increases and changes in benefit structure is not modernizing. It is both taking a step backward and shifting more of those costs onto you. If this isn't breaking faith with our troops, I don't know what is.
So just to put a finer point on the last part where you were talking about guaranteed access to care, because what happens here, this is more than a dollars and cents issue, right? We're not just raising co-pays. We might de facto be denying health care to certain people that fall into that. So I know at Fort Campbell, for instance, if you're newly stationed there, the on-base facilities are locked down, so they send you into town, right? So if the rules change and there's no guaranteed access to care, then in essence, you don't have health care.
Well, this is kind of like what it used to be in the old days of Champus, and people my age probably remember that, and there was no guaranteed for access. And you either had long waiting times to get in for whatever appointment it would be, go to the emergency room, or you just wait. The reason TRICARE came into being was really to try to satisfy that issue, to provide access for people who could not get into their physician or provider. That's why we brought in and established the TRICARE program. So I really think it's going to be telling when we see if the MTF, military treatment facilities, try to increase their capabilities and access to accommodate people that are going to try to get in there. So we'll be concerned about that. But one of the offshoots is that more people will probably end up having to use private providers, or they're calling them network providers, which another thing, we're not even sure that a network is established. Is it going to be a network established by a company, or is it going to be a list of participating providers that you will select from? There's many unanswered questions here, and we're hoping to get more answers to these really important specifics starting tomorrow and the days that follow. So we'll be providing those for you.
This is, I think, a poster child for something that's perceived by lawmakers and civilians to be too good a deal, right? TRICARE co-pays are too low relative to what you would pay on the corporate side. But what happens beyond the dollars and cents, I think, is the thing that we're talking about here. How this nets out in terms of quality of care for service members and their families is substantial.
Oh, it's going to be key. Trying to get in to see your provider, and we have been told that there's no longer what they termed PCMs, primary care managers. You won't have a PCM. You'll have a provider ostensibly, but it doesn't sound like there'll be anyone there to manage your care. They have told us they're still going to retain the medical home model, but how can you have a medical home without central primary care managers really kind of monitoring your care and overseeing your care and your specialty referrals and things like that? So it's, again, Ward, there's a lot of unanswered questions here, and there's certainly a lot of second and third order effects of what can happen to the military health system
Well,
here.
including retention, right? I mean, if this is a quality of life issue,
Oh,
that could be the thing that pushes you off the fence. A talented mid-grade enlisted guy or officer would leave, if his family's unhappy about the quality of their health care.
Well, healthcare is probably one of the most important things to every
Absolutely.
service member, and especially when they have families.
Absolutely. So Jeremy, how does this net out? How's the confluence of all of these variables? Commissaries, pay, housing allowance, higher TRICARE co-pays. How does that play out, for your average family, on the streets, if you will?
Thanks, Ward. I appreciate the question, and I'll just be honest with you. I've been taking this in. Some of these numbers, it's the first time I've seen these numbers, and honestly, the longer I sit here, the more upset I get, frankly. I suspect everyone out there is kind of feeling the same way, honestly. And, this obviously going to affect my family, and I think Tom made a great point earlier. I mean, think if this affects my family, the junior enlisted that really help run, especially the junior enlisted NCOs that run our military, they're really going to be affected by this, and that shouldn't be the way it is. I see this, it's they calling it loss of purchasing power. I see this as a pay cut, pure and simple is the way I look at this. And I think lots of service members and their families are going to be sitting there thinking back to the last 12 years and saying, was it worth it? Was what I did, what my family did, worth it? And I think for a lot of reasons they'll say, yeah, it was worth it. For my buddies, for my friends, and they'll say, great, I served. And then they'll think, what do I tell my kids? What do I say to them? And do I tell them to make the service a career? I think a lot of military families are going to say no to that because of all of this that's happening right now. I've looked at the budget a little bit. I'm probably as well informed as the average military family. I mean, what the president said the other day was this is the end of the age of austerity. And I'm thinking, it's not the end of the age of austerity for military families. As near as I can tell, the people most impacted by the president's budget are millionaires and military families. And what's wrong with that scenario? And I honestly think, my personal opinion is, that you put and you help people understand, the civilian population understand what sacrifice means to our military service members and their families, and then you say, this is what the president's budget suggests, or what he wants to accomplish, what DOD wants to accomplish. And I personally have faith that when you explain it the right way and in full, I think the American public would say, this budget does not reflect our values.
So we'd like to bring up some of the questions that folks have been asking on Facebook. This is probably a good one for Tom and Mike. This is from Donald on Facebook. He asks, does the proposed budget grandfather any of the benefits for certain groups of people, or will the proposed changes affect everyone regardless of their current status?
Yeah, I mean, just for the particular cuts they're talking about, we're not, it doesn't say, like, if you're currently serving, your commissaries aren't going to get cut. I mean, what they're talking about is cutting basic pay, cutting commissaries, cutting housing allowance. And so, yeah, that is going to affect people right now. It's going to affect people today. The one caveat is for the housing allowance, it won't affect you until your next PCS move. So you might have a year, maybe two at the most, before you get hit. But this is an immediate hit because it's a budget-driven decision, and you can't save today. They need to make the savings now because they've had a year plus of sequestration, and they're looking at potentially another year of sequestration in 2016, and that's really what's driving all this insanity.
Anything you want to add to that, Mike?
No, I'd just say, yeah, absolutely, the sequestration is driving this really hard. That's the key issue out there. It's forcing DOD to make some really, really tough decisions that it will affect those currently serving folks out there as well as the retirees. So this, as Tom said, this does affect folks immediately. It has an immediate impact on them and their lives, the lives of their families. So it's significant.
I think it's important to review the short history of sequestration, right? Because as you said, Tom, this is not being driven by some peace dividend, right? I mean, current events and the military requirements have not waned. This was driven by something that any number of lawmakers told me was just a function of Congress doing its job, right? The sequestration was supposed to find $1.2 trillion to balance the budget, right? And the showdown game of chicken, where finally it's like, whoops, and now we have to find this savings. So, it is, pretty obvious that this is a sort of tail wagging the dog atmosphere. As we're pointing out here, that potentially the net impacts are way beyond what any budgeteer is probably considering. Colonel Mike Hayden, another question I think is best answered by you. Martin on Facebook asks, how do we defend against these proposed cuts?
Well, that's a very good question. I'm going to step back, though, and I'm going to try to talk a little bit about the grandfathering, if I could.
Sure.
There is one piece that was in there that does grandfather the current, not the current force, if you would, but current retirees. The department actually took a fairly interesting twist to the TRICARE for Life enrollment fee. When you take a look at what they're trying to do and means test along with the enrollment fee, they've actually taken part of it and they've said anyone who's age 65, if I remember correctly, in the year of 2016, when this is fully implemented, will grandfather them and they're going to be exempt from the enrollment fee. It's only for then new entrants that come into age into TRICARE for Life after that point in time, 1st of January of 2016. So there's a little grandfather clause, not so much for the currently serving force, if you would, but when you do take a look at some of the retirees, they've actually taken and carved out one of the, what I would call, the voting population that would be in an uproar over this. Many of those that are over age 65 that do like to write to their congressman, that they have actually been exempt from some of these fees, if you would, or grandfathered by not getting the TRICARE enrollment fee. From our perspective, that rolls back into the second question, and that is, what can we do? What are we going to do? And that's going to be part of this ongoing debate. Fortunately, the coalition, the military coalition, which MOAA is, IAVA, and others, 33 associations, we're going to gather together. We're building testimony. We're going to go to the Hill. We're going to provide testimony to the Armed Services Personnel Subcommittees in both the House and the Senate. And then at the same time, each of the associations are going to go over, we're going over in April this year to storm the Hill and talk specifically on just these issues, what the budget has and what it proposes. And we're going to ask our members to act. And I'll ask that even at later on when we get it towards the end of this discussion. We're going to be looking for all those that are on the camera right now that are listening in. We're going to be asking you to join the fight and act. And we'll give ways in which we can do that through our association with other associations combined. Just as we did with the COLA cutback, if you would, and the Bipartisan Budget Act, we got groups together, the Keep Your Promise, IAVAs of this world, other associations within the coalition came together and we were able to beat back the COLA provision. We're going to be looking to do the same type of measures, and fortunately we have a little bit more of a deliberative process this year where we'll be able to reach out to Congress and work from, if you would, the hearing process, the markup process, to the point where it goes into a House bill and a Senate bill, and then into even conference. And we'll be working closely with members of Congress and professional staffers to do just that.
So we are getting close to the end of the hour here. I would also like to join Tom in thanking MOAA and Admiral Ryan for hosting this town hall. And what I want to say in general to our viewers is, whether you're an active duty service member, a veteran, or retiree, make no mistake, you are under attack. And I think sometimes we sort of think we don't have a lobby, we don't have advocates, but as you just heard Mike say, you do. But they're only as good as you're aware of them, and they're only as good as your involvement with them. Without IAVA, the backlog probably isn't addressed. I can go back farther. Without IAVA, there is no new GI Bill. Without MOAA, the 1% COLA on retiree thing is not reversed. So you have a voice, but you need to be aware of it, and you need to let those folks know what your concerns are going forward here. So this is just the start. These sorts of town halls, the Keep Your Promise, hashtag Keep Your Promise, those kinds of initiatives are just the start of ensuring that the right decisions are made for those who've given their all. So Mike, if you would, please close us out.
I will. To wrap up, I'd like to bring up, we've seen it a couple of times, chart number 5, and just talk about the overall financial impact. When you take a look at the E7 with 10 years of service, you can look at the bottom of the chart and it tells you it's nearly $5,000 lost purchasing power that they'll see that they're going to lose when this thing is fully implemented. And when you look at that captain, that Army captain out there, 03, same thing, family of 4, they're looking at nearly $6,000 loss, around $5,900 annually as lost purchasing power. Our issue is that this whole budget drill right now that is being proposed to the members of Congress is trying to balance the budget on the backs of military members and their families. As I mentioned, collectively, as a coalition, as the Keep Your Promise group and others, we fought back the COLA provision that came out of the Bipartisan Budget Act. We're going to need to do the same as we go forward. And we do that when we do that with one collective voice. You know, MOAA goes over and we talk on the Hill and we're 380,000 strong. When we go over as the coalition, we're 5.5 million strong. So it's important for us to, everyone on board that's looking at this tonight, to join the fight. You can do that, take a look and see where we're going with this budget battle, if you would, by visiting moa.org/budget battle. Share that with your networks that are out there. Collectively, we'll need you to act. Join that fight, contact your legislator, let them know how you feel on cutting pay and benefits for the entire military community. And when I say the entire military community, I'm talking currently serving, retirees, survivors, and all of their family members. I want to thank the panelists, the great panelists that we've had, and I also want to especially thank you, Ward, for moderating this event tonight. And everyone, please have a great evening.